So I had a few questions this week about making moss, and I thought it's easiest just to do a tiny little video for you. So I've added some wool tops in this direction, and now I'm going to add some in the opposing direction. So we've got right angled fibres, and I'm just doing it in a really bright emerald green because that was the sample that someone was interested in. And I thought rather than go into great details, it's probably best just to show you how. So I start out with the emerald green. I will put a few little darker pieces of wool top in as well, just to give a little bit of shadowing here and there, because moss always looks a little bit different. It's not all the one colour. So these are just wool fibres, just to tone things down a tiny bit. Emerald green moss is not something that I have a lot of samples of. I tend to go more the earthy colours, but I understand how nice it is to be able to make something exactly the way you're planning. So I'll just put a little bit of the emerald green over the surface. Now what I like to do then is to use a range of different yarns and different fibres on top. So I'm going to put the yarns in first. So this is a boucle yarn, and it's got a little bit of mohair in. So that'll give, what we're wanting is moss with a little bit of pile. This is some cotton yarn, which I think could be really nice. And this one's a synthetic fluffy yarn. So this one will come up really nicely. And what you can do, if it's too hairy, you can trim it back at the end. This is just, again, a boucle with some mohair. And this is just a little bit of one ply that has a few different contrasting colours. Again, usually when there's moss, there's a few little specks of rocks or dirt. So that can look terrific. And then some nice emeraldy green bits and pieces. So, as is usual, I tend to just do it fairly randomly, and we'll see what happens. So I'm going to snip up these little fibres just into kind of fluff that goes over the surface. And some bits I'll have darker, so you can see where I've got the dark lines underneath. I'll put some of the darker fibre there. By now, after having done the course for a while, you're used to my random layouts, which I never do know. I have no idea how this is going to turn out, but it's a sample. So we'll see. And this is exactly how you should do it. I've never made a piece of emerald green moss that I want to look piley. So this for me is as much a sample as it is for you. So snipping this emerald green fibre, and eventually once this is felted, then what I'll be doing is using a wire brush to bring up some of the pile to try and get a little bit of extra kind of velvety texture that you see in moss. And as I said, I have no idea how this is going to turn out, so fingers crossed. And I kind of like to do it that way because this is how you'd be doing it if you're at home, and you don't know how it's going to turn out. So this is a chenille, cotton chenille, and I have a feeling that this might look really nice, but again, I'm not sure. Where I'm putting the cotton chenille, I may well put a tiny little bit of, I don't want to put it too thick because it's cotton and it's not as easy to felt in. And I'm cutting it quite short. And I'm putting it on quite thickly. But these cut edges should felt in nicely. It's kind of a bit magic. Okay, so now I'm just going to give it a little bit of a sprinkle, a little touch up here and there. What else will I put in? Some of this kind of, I wish I had a green in this, but I don't. So I will just put a little bit in here. So it's the hairy yarn. Sometimes it's a rayon. These are ones that I've got from a second-hand shop, and I haven't burnt yet, so I'm not sure what the fibre makeup is. But if it's nylon, it often felts in really nicely, so fingers crossed. any of these fibery yarns, even if they're synthetic, will usually catch in with the wool. Put that through. And I also have some, this one's interesting. It's a very hairy. So I don't know what this is going to be like. We'll see. But I think this could be great to kind of give some interesting texture. And you know, like often in mossy places, you have these long filaments of moss sticking up. So I think if I pop some, do some work with the wire brush, that could be interesting. We'll see. Okay, so that's my sprinkles. Then again, a little bit of this darker boucle. Pop that in. Now it's getting a little bit dark. As I said, I don't have a lot of emerald green yarn, so we kind of just, this will give you the idea. This one's quite nice. It's a little bit yellowy, so that might pop up that colour a bit. And you can see I'm just cutting it maybe 3 millimeters long. I also have some different yarns. So these are some linen. This is linen here. And you know how I like linen. I'm going to put some of that in. I'm going to put quite a bit around the edges and just see what happens when we wire brush it. As I said, this is just a sample of what you can do. So we'll see what texture that gives if we put a little bit of linen and then we pop some of this nice viscose over the top. Again, I haven't got the exact right greens, but it will show us what those fibres do, even though they're not the exact right colours. This one's quite nice. And I'm going to put some of those fibres over the top, the viscose fibres, over the top of the chopped up fibre as well. We'll just see what happens. Just give that a little pat down. Okay, so it's very textured. And just where I've put that chenille, I'm going to give a very fine cobweb of wool over the top, because of all of those fibres I use, the cotton chenille is the least likely to felt in, so it can do with a little bit of extra help with some wool. I'll cover that with netting, and I've got my usual pot of soapy water, which is here. I'm just going to wet that down. Then once I've wet it down, I have a little look, see if I need to do anything extra. So what we're really interested with this is just seeing what these different fibres do. As I said, the colour's not going to be bright emerald like requested, but it shows you the technique. So wanting to get that completely wet through, wanting the no puffy pieces. And with these, it's quite important to felt them down quite hard, because I'm going to use a wire brush on them. So I'm just going to blot that so it's easy to remove the net. And let's have a look at what we look like. Okay, it's going to be interesting. It might be awful, we just don't know at this point. I'm going to give it some extra rubbing. And you might need to put a little bit of olive oil soap. I think this one's okay. I've got plenty of suds in there, but you may need to give a little rub with olive oil. So what I'm doing by rubbing is just trying to seal that surface before we roll, trying to get a few of those threads and fibres to felt in. This might look kind of rocky and mossy, I think. But as I said, it's an experiment. We don't quite know what's going to happen, but I do like these little bits where there's a little bit of red or a little bit of brown. It just makes it look a little bit more interesting. So I'm just going to lift that up and have a little look. So yeah, really interesting looking texture. Just going to move my bubbles and spin it and do a little bit of rolling. So just that usual squeezy roll, trying to get those fibres to all join together. Okay, we'll unroll and have a little look. Oh, nice. And at this point, you could still, if you needed to, add some things on, or you could take some things off. So if I thought those little bits of red don't look, so getting some interesting textures. At this point you could sort of stretch it if you wanted to into a more organic shape. I sort of just laid out in a bit of a rectangle, but by giving a bit of a tug. So let's keep going. Just going to have a little look and see how things seem to be attaching. Okay, so that viscose isn't attaching as well, so that's interesting in itself. So that's over some wool threads, so I'm just adding a little bit of extra water for that, and keep rolling. If you put silk fibres in on the surface as well, they will go in a little bit easier than the cellulose fibres. Because the silk is a protein fibre like the wool, they seem to be, it's easier for those wool fibres to grab onto the silk than it is to grab onto a cellulose fibre. Nice. The other thing that I thought of that you could use, or you could experiment with, and I'll let you do that, not me, you could experiment with some silk velvet as well, because it's got a really nice plush pile. Just going to put a towel under there. Once the fibres have stuck together and they're not following your finger, you can then begin to roll that on itself. Just rubbing that with my olive oil soap, because I'm about to prepare it to roll on itself. Okay, so I'm just going to, now it's got plenty of soap on it, I can take that off the bubble wrap and just roll it on my towel. A little wet spot on your towel is really great. Let's have a look what's happening. Okay, so that's interesting. So the viscose is just sitting on the surface and it's not really going in as well as one would imagine. So that's good to know. But we just keep trying I'm just going to rub that with my hands a little bit. I'm not real impressed with the little pink bits, so I'll probably just snip those out at this point. A bit too pink. But if I had my Inktense pencils, I could actually turn those into a nice dark brown or a nice olivey green by adding some onto the surface. And these long little bits here too, I'll just give them a snip. And you want to get the felt really nice and hard. And it's important with these to get them to really felt down hard, because you're going to be wire brushing. You want all those, well, the fibres that will attach, you want them well and truly attached. And it's going to be trial and error to find out which ones work and which ones don't. I showed you a whole lot of different yarns and different fibres, and then we just see what happens with them. It's just the adventure of it, isn't it? And the reality is we're working with wool. It's not going to look exactly like moss because it's wool. So what we're wanting is kind of the essence of moss. And it is actually interesting with different wools. Of all the wools, when you're felting, and those of us who've been felting for a really long time, anything with a high amount of yellow is harder to felt always. And I don't know what it is. It's something in the chemical makeup of the yellow dye and the effect it has on the wool. And, you know, if I'm doing a class and someone chooses to make a yellow bag, their bag will take twice as long to felt as so this emerald green's got a lot of yellow in it, so it's probably going to take a little bit longer. See what's happening in here. Okay, there's some interesting textures coming along. And this is when you start looking to see which wools give you the texture that you're looking for. And because I've tried a whole range of different ones, we don't know which ones are going to work the best. Okay, so I'm going to just start to see what happens if I give that a little bit of a Now I can't start doing that until these fibres are attached well in. If I kept going too hard, then I could run the risk of some of the fibres coming up. And that's one of the reasons, if you're doing something like this, put more fibre on than you would normally, more little bits and pieces, because when you do wire brush it, some of it is probably going to come out. So err on the side of excess. So which ones have gone well? So not that one, it hasn't gone as well. going to trim some of that so it's not loopy, and snip some of it back. Depending on what this is going to be on, if it's going to be on a wall hanging, you don't really have to worry if some of your fibres haven't attached as well, but certainly if it was on a wearable, you'd have to be mindful that your fibres don't come off. But I don't imagine anyone would be probably doing a mossy wearable, but you never know. So these parts here, that darker, fluffier wool has felted in okay, which is good. So as far as the wools go, the boucle wool went in really nicely, and I think the chenille went quite well too for texture. So I'm just going to go and give that a rinse, and then I'll be back. Look at that. Okay. So this is just a carding comb, but you could use a dog brush or a tiny wire brush from an automotive store. They're always cheap. So there we go, we kind of got moss. As I said, if it was all, if I had the right colours, it would be better, but we just make do with what we've got. And as I said, if I wanted to, and look at this little one here, it's really cute, little wispy. They're just like those little filaments that you get in the moss. So keep your eye out at second-hand shops for those awful fluffy yarns, because they're really helpful. And these ones have gone in really well. So as I said, often they're nylon, and nylon felts really well. When they're polyester, sometimes they don't felt as well. Nylon has a different makeup. It has a little bit more tooth. It's not as slippery as polyester, so it will get in a bit easier. And also having that little bit of mohair in those yarns gives it that little bit of pile. So there's our lovely little mossy textures. So I hope you find that helpful, and it gives you a little bit of inspiration for if you're trying to do a mossy piece. You'll do it completely different to mine, I'm sure, because you'll have different yarns and different fibres to play with, but that just gives you the basics of how to get a mossy, lovely mossy texture. Enjoy.